Canada is getting ready to choose its next Prime Minister. And I am voting for the first time and I do not want to vote for the loudest. So I decided to compare Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney on 7 parameters: taxes, housing, immigration, healthcare, climate change, public safety, and foreign policy. No party spin, no media fluff, just facts, strategy, and impact. So let's get started. Now, this is part 2 of my series where I talked in the first video that I made, I talked about who is Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney. And then I compared the last 40 years of conservatives and liberals. And in this particular video, in today's video, I'll be talking about election 2025 and I'll be breaking down the policy on 7 parameters. And this is basically part 2. So if you have missed the part 1 of this series, make sure that you watch that as well. It's not like you'll not get context of this video. So if you want to continue watching this video, that's also fine. But first, I wanted to talk about why did liberals lose in 1984 and why did conservatives lose in 1993. This is a slide that I've taken from the previous presentation that I made, and we saw that both liberals and conservatives lost in 1984 and 1993 because of a recession, and people were tired and they wanted change. And this is exactly what's happening right now as well. This is early 2020s financial crisis. I'm pretty sure this will be talked a lot more, just like we talk about the 1980s, 1990s, the Great Depression of 1930s. And we'll talk about this as well. There's pandemic and recession. Inflation has peaked at 8% in 2022. Unemployment has peaked at 7%. Right now, it's very close to 7% as well. And interest rates were not as high as it were in 1980s and 90s, but given the context and where we have come from, we were at low 1% interest rates, right? And we had seen 7% in 2023 at its peak. And the federal debt, which has increased from 200 billion in 80s to 423 billion in 90s, and it has now more than doubled again, in fact, almost tripled to $1.25 trillion. So clearly we have spent too much money and we have too much debt at very high interest rates. Now, when it comes to federal debt, I want to set the record straight because a lot of people in the comment section in the last video said that conservatives are better at managing debt. I don't see anyone better or worse at managing debt. Liberals have got us to $1.25 trillion. And of course, there was recession and there was, a pandemic that had come. But if you look at conservatives, and it's just me setting the record straight, I'm not saying liberals are better than conservative. Don't bash me in the comments there. But I'm just setting the record straight that whenever there's a recession, you have to print money. There'll be more spending. There'll be less tax collection. And it's just how it works. And, it's just how it is, right? So if you look at 2006 to 8, 2006 is when Stephen Harper with the finance minister Jim Flaherty and Mark Carney, all three of them were, together when the financial crisis happened in the US, the subprime crisis. And they got us out of the subprime crisis and Canada was not impacted as much. But that doesn't mean that we did not take on more debt. In fact, we were at $700 billion in debt by the end of this, conservative run in 2015 when liberals came into power, and now we are at 1.25 trillion. So no one is better, at managing financial debt, and that's very clear. And that's something that you cannot just control in a recession, because in a recession you will be spending more and you will be earning less, and that is the definition of going into debt. But the real question right now, because Mark Carney is running for Prime Minister, is did Mark Carney save us from a financial crisis in 2008 and 2009? Before I get into the policy of these two individuals, I first want to get this out of the way. And this is what Stephen Harper had to say about Mark Carney a few weeks ago.
In a letter, Harper accused Carney of taking credit for things he had little or nothing to do with back then, asserting that the hard calls were made by former finance minister, the late Jim Flaherty.
Now, of course, Stephen Harper is saying that Mark Carney did not have a role to play, but I just can't think of an era where the Bank of Canada governor had no role to play in a recession. It's just not possible. Now, of course, Stephen Harper is endorsing Pierre Poilievre. That just makes sense because they are both conservatives. But Mark Carney did have a role to play in 2008, 2009. But was he the person who took us out of recession? No, because he can't be. He was not in power. He was not the finance minister. But he had a role to play where he slashed interest rate quickly and aggressively to keep liquidity flowing. This is something that liberals do very well. And he is a very well-renowned economist, and he did the same. Introduced extraordinary lending facilities to ensure banks had access to short-term funding, coordinated G7 central bank actions. So, he was coordinating the global action on central banks, and then maintained confidence in Canadian banks by constantly communicating stability and taking proactive steps. Now, this is all fluff, honestly, but as a Bank of Canada governor, the biggest one was the first one, where he slashed interest rates quickly, aggressively to keep liquidity flowing, at the same time keeping inflation low, and that is something that he was successful in doing. But Jim Flaherty, the finance minister at that time, played a massive role by introducing a 40 billion stimulus package through 2009 federal budget. He launched extraordinary financing framework which supported credit markets and banks with insured mortgage purchase programs, and he backed infrastructure spending, tax cuts, and direct transfer to boost demand. All this is the reason why we had more federal debt than ever before, and it's not because both these individuals didn't do their job. In fact, they did their job really, really well. It's just that recession comes with more spending and more debt. In fact, I would argue that both these individuals played their role, both were important roles, but the reason why we did not go into a very deep recession like US did was because OSFI was formed in 1987, and they have very strict regulations around how banks work in Canada. And they cannot give the ninja loans that thousands of banks in the US give. We have select banks who control 80% of the market, and OSFI controls how they lend. And that's the reason why we did not go into a deep recession. So all the debate in my comment section about Jim Flaherty being the reason why we were out of a recession, that's all true. But obviously it's, like Mark Carney's word against Stephen Harper. We don't have Jim Flaherty right now, to talk about what Mark Carney's role was. But I would argue that it was OSFI. And again, it was the Conservatives who came up with OSFI. And that's the reason why we did not go into a deep recession. Anyways, all that said, let's talk about Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney, the main topic of this discussion, where we compare both these individuals on 7 parameters: taxes, housing, immigration, healthcare, social services, public safety, climate change, foreign policy. Let's talk about taxes first. Pierre Poilievre is very clear. He wants to reduce income tax at the lowest tax bracket from 15% to 12.75%. That's very significant. And that would save almost $900 per person, or $1,500 to $1,800 per family per year. And that would cost the government $14 billion. I'll talk about that in a bit, because there's some criticism of where this money will come from. No GST on new homes. We all know that, up to $1.3 million. Then he'll cover the $25,000 per unit in development charges. Development charges can be as high as $150,000. I actually made a video on this. If you want to watch that video, you can. But $25,000 per unit will certainly help builders build better, but it's a fraction of what the development charges are. And I hope that he looks, or whoever comes to power, they look into the development charges and see if there's something that they can do to reduce that, because the cost of construction is actually going up because of development charges. Anyways, capital gain tax deferral if proceeds are reinvested in Canadian assets. I love this because if you sell a property right now and invest in property in Canada, you have to pay taxes, capital gain taxes on that. But in US, you have a 1031 exchange where you can actually roll over, the proceeds from that asset sale into another asset. And if you do it in Canadian assets, you can actually get a tax deferral, which is amazing. He wants to, clearly he wants to repeal carbon tax completely, both from the industry as well as from consumers. And he wants to increase the TFSA limit by $5,000 if invested in Canadian companies. Now, I don't know how it will be implemented and regulated, but if it happens, if it can happen, then that will be great, and that will just put more money into people's pocket on retirement when they don't have to pay taxes on money kept in TFSA, because it just grows tax-free. Mark Carney, on the other hand, wants to reduce the income tax at the lowest level again by 1%, from 15% to 14%, saving about $825 per family. So it's slightly lower than what Pierre Poilievre is promising. No GST on new homes for up to $1 million for first-time home buyers. So Pierre Poilievre has not been clear whether it's first-time home buyers or not, but Mark Carney has made it clear that it's first-time home buyers. No carbon tax on consumers. He did remove. That's why our gas is cheaper right now. Incentive-based program. So he wants to, come up with an incentive-based program, but carbon tax will still be levied on businesses. Now, Pierre Poilievre has in the past said that if you still levy carbon tax on businesses, that cost just gets passed on to the consumer, and I agree. So Mark Carney does not want to get rid of the carbon tax on businesses, but he is okay to remove it from, on consumers. Now, the big question and a lot of criticism that has come from different parts of media is that this cost of $14 billion, and all this will cost money. It will cost federal money, right? Where will all this money come from? Because we already have a deficit. We already are spending more than what we are earning through taxes. So cutting costs or cutting taxes will actually put a lot more pressure, and we'll go further into debt. And while that's true, Pierre Poilievre has a statement on how he'll manage that, and he says that to offset the revenue loss from tax cuts, which he's talking about, Pierre Poilievre advocates for reducing federal bureaucracy and implementing a pay-as-you-go law, which would require any new government spending, so the tax cut, to be matched by equivalent saving elsewhere. So he will be cutting on spending elsewhere to get us the tax savings. I'll talk about that in a bit. But on the contrary, Mark Carney says that he does not want to cut any spending to the provinces, and rather he would control the growth rate of the government spending from 9% to 2% annually, with an objective to balancing the operating budget within 3 years. And this is just a strategy where he feels that he's responsible for the provinces and the grants that they provide to different, social programs. So he doesn't want to cut that, but he wants to reduce the growth rate, and that's how he will balance the budget. Now, this is a video that I made a few weeks ago on how the tax system in Canada is broken, and I talked about the revenue sources, and I'll just talk about why I'm saying this in a bit. This is an answer of where will the money come from and what Pierre Poilievre was talking about. But the revenue sources that you have, obviously, personal income taxes, income tax makes the most of federal revenue. It's $459 billion total. And the spend that they do, $256 billion of it is going to social services. And obviously, a lot of these things are important. And within social services, a lot of it is important. But $256 billion is more than half the entire spending that they're doing. Now, this $256 billion, which is being spent on social services, you break this down, over half of this is going into a line item which is called other social transfers. And if you compare this against 2014 federal spending, which was when the Conservatives were in power, it was about $50 billion. So it has more than doubled, almost tripled in the last 10 years. And then, in fact, if you look at the entire other social transfers budget, $131 billion that was spent last year. That was the entire social services spending. So I understand that there's inflation in the last 10 years, but, we have spent a lot more on other social transfers. And this other social transfers is, in fact, affordable housing, homelessness, rehab, disability inclusion, a lot of things which are very important. But if someone audits these numbers, the $131 billion, I'm pretty sure they can find $14 billion on tax cuts. So I do believe Pierre Poilievre when he says that he can do tax cuts and he can do pay as you go. So the more tax cuts he does, he actually takes away, a little bit of transfers. I think it's possible because $131 billion is way more than what we should be spending. I'm not an economist, but I really feel that someone has to audit these books. Let's talk about housing now. Pierre Poilievre has never given a number of how many houses he wants to build in the next 5 years because he was very focused on the inputs. But again, Mark Carney came up with a $500,000 per year number, has gotten a lot of criticism. But Pierre Poilievre recently came out and said that he wants to build 2.3 million homes in the next 5 years, whereas Mark Carney said that he wants to build 500,000 homes per year in the next 10 years. So Pierre Poilievre wants to incentivize municipalities that approve 15% more home building. So he wants to take the provinces with him, municipalities with him. He wants to mandate cities to permit high density housing around federally funded transit stations as a condition for receiving federal funds. Again, trying to incentivize government bodies and cities and municipalities to build more homes. He requires cities to pre-approve housing projects to qualify for federal infrastructure funding. He wants to sell 15% of federal land and buildings in urban areas within the first 100 days if he comes to power. And he also understands that he has to train more tradesperson because there was a report that came out that you need 83% more tradesperson to build the amount of homes that everyone is talking about. And without that, you just can't build at the same frequency. So he wants to train 350,000 new tradesperson over the next 5 years. And there are grants that are being given, which is exactly what Mark Carney is also doing. So I won't say that one is better than the other. And again, there's no GST on 1.3 million homes, plus development charges reduced by about $125,000 per home. So all these are amazing things. And if they actually happen, it can actually move the needle. Mark Carney is a little bit different. For example, Pierre Poilievre wants to take the provinces, cities, municipalities, and he wants to incentivize them to build more homes. On the other hand, Mark Carney wants to create a crown corporation, just like Canada Post, called BCH, Build Canada Homes, to act as a developer for affordable housing projects, including public land. So it's a very different approach where he wants to run this centrally, whereas Pierre Poilievre wants to run it, with the municipalities, the way it's happening right now, but giving a little more incentive to do it quicker. He actually came out with a housing plan which says $25 billion financing to prefab home builders. He feels that we'll be able to build for longer. For instance, we can build more homes because in winters you are not building a lot of. You can't do an exterior, but if you do prefab homes, they are done in warehouses, and therefore you can potentially build homes quicker. I don't want to talk about whether prefab homes are sturdy, like what's their lifetime. I've not done enough research on that, but that's what his housing policy says. $10 billion in low-cost financing and capital to afford home builders, cut red tape and lower cost of home building. Now, these are amazing things, but again, a lot of fluff, which should already have happened in the last 10 years, that liberals have been in power. So it's not happened now. So, Mark Carney is saying that he'll do it. So, that's good for him. And I hope that he's able to do that. Double the funding to union training and innovation program. Again, this is something that I've never heard a liberal Liberals say, but they have to do this, which is exactly what Pierre Poilievre was also saying, that they have to double down on training the unions so that they are able to train more tradesperson, because they are the ones who will be building homes and we don't have enough of them. And no GST on 1 million homes. I already talked about this. So if you look at these plans, the only difference that I see here, again, these are just plans, right? We don't know whether they'll be doing it or not. And I'm not leaning towards, Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre here. All I'm saying is that, the difference is that Pierre Poilievre wants to do it with the municipalities and cities, and he wants to incentivize them, whereas Mark Carney wants to do it centrally, where he creates BCH, which is a crown corporation, and they build affordable housing. Who does what? I have no idea, because they are both not targeting the main problem. Canada doesn't have a problem of not building enough homes. In fact, if you look at the population in the last 10 years, it has increased, by from 35 to 41 million. That's the population increase that has happened in the last 10 years. And the number of houses that Canada has built in the last 10 years have been in line with the amount of population that we have had. So there have been 5.7 million more people. There have been 2.4 million more homes. So there is 2.34 people living in each home. So if you were to take the increment in housing with the increment in people, which is very equivalent to an average household size. So for every 2.4 people or 2.34 people, there is a home that is being built. So not a problem, right? So we have built homes, but the problem is, and that's something that none of the leaders have talked about, is they've just not built the right kind of homes. People with families with 2.3 people in a household are not looking to live in condos, and that's exactly what we have done. In the last 10 years, we have built, we have gone from building 45% of all construction, in apartments to doing 60% of all construction in apartments. So we have increased that by 15%. We are building a lot more condos, and the condos are getting smaller, and that is not the kind of housing that Canadians with families need. They need more single-family homes. And there's a stat that says in 2025, they are estimating that 58% less single-family homes will be built, which is exactly the reason why you see in this current market that condos, the prices have gone down for condos. They are at a, like a 10-year low or some crazy stat there. In Toronto, I'm not talking about Kitchener and all these places, but it's at a very, very low level. Whereas if you look at single-family homes, it's not slowing down. It's sure, it's slowed down a little, but it's not at the same pace as condos, and that's because we don't have enough single-family homes. And both these leaders, unfortunately, have not talked about that, and they are both talking about kind of densification in existing areas, and that can only be done through condos. So I hope whoever comes to power targets the real problem of building more single-family homes. Otherwise, the cost of housing will continue to increase, and we'll continue to have an unaffordability problem because we just do not have enough single-family homes, which is the need of the hour. Let's talk about immigration. Barring a few numbers, they have the exact same plan almost. Pierre Poilievre wants to cap temporarily at least, to 250,000 immigrants per year who come to Canada, whereas he wants to ban or limit the intake of temporary foreign workers, which is students and work permit holders, which is exactly what is happening in the Liberals right now. But they did screw up the immigration for a very long time. They're reducing the intake from 485,000 in 2024 to 365,000 in 2027, still more than what Pierre Poilievre wants. And I kind of agree that, we need more immigration, but we need more quality immigration. We need more, skilled immigration. Just like me, I'm a master's, in marketing, and I'm in Canada and I'm contributing to the taxes. We need more of this immigration than student and work permit holders, and which is exactly what Mark Carney also wants. So immigration wise, I don't think there's a huge gap in what both of these people are saying. Healthcare and social service, a little bit of gap there. He wants to train more, like licensed professionals, doctors, dentists, because there's a shortage of that, and he wants to expedite that by starting a Blue Seal national testing standard, and he wants to review and potentially reduce federal spending, which may affect certain social programs. Now, whenever Conservatives come to power, they do look at the social programs and the spending on that, and they want to cut that so that they are able to give more tax cuts to people. It's just how a typical, Conservative blueprint, and depending on who you are, you would like it or not like it. Whereas Mark Carney has a lot more spending happening in this, in his plan, where Canadian Dental Care Plan, Carney aims to expand and solidify the program to provide comprehensive dental coverage to more Canadians. Universal Pharma Care System, where a lot of the medication will also be covered in the healthcare system, which is not happening right now. And then the $10 a day childcare, he wants to expand it to 100,000 new homes, which is all great things if you are someone with kids or if you are looking at these programs. That's not something which is solidified by Pierre Poilievre yet, and he has been more focused on housing and taxes and other things things which are more talked about right now, public safety being one. Let's talk about public safety. Pierre Poilievre wants to repeal C-75, which is the bail reform, and C-5. Both these are violent. If you commit a violent crime, if you're a repeat offender, you are protected under the law, and he wants to repeal that because repeat offenders in his books should be penalized more, which, to be honest, makes sense, right? 3 strikes and you are outlaw. I don't know what he'll call it, but that's what he calls it right now. He wants to close the supervised consumption sites. These are basically related to drug sites where you actually give a drug addict you just wean them off drugs by giving them little by little. He wants to get rid of that because it's not safe in communities with kids around, which makes sense. Again, conservatives, when they come to power, they do cut on social programs. That's how they give tax cuts. They want to end safe supply programs, again related to drug addiction centers, and he advocates for focusing on illegal gun smuggling and opposes additional restrictions on licensed firearm owners. He's not pro-gun. We are not like US, right? We are way, I won't say better or worse, but we have gun control to a large extent. He just says that, instead of putting more restrictions on gun holders, licensed gun holders, you need to have stringent, laws around smuggling and use of that gun for the right uses. So I think that's where Pierre Poilievre leans, which is a very center, right approach, not very right approach that US has, some of the states in the US has. Now, Mark Carney also wants to tighten the C-75 and C-5 bills, so not very different from there, and he wants to take a more global approach where he wants to bolster his military, the 2% global targets, that the G7 has. He wants to meet those targets, and Pierre Poilievre has been targeting Mark Carney's policy of spending more on military. But again, depending on who you are, it could be important or it might not be that important. Pierre Poilievre is more, granular, for, Canada first. He wants to look at after the people, the society, safe supply program, because the communities should be safe, whereas Mark Carney is like, okay, let's just, spend money on defense so that our overall defense is much stronger at an international stage. Let's talk about climate change, and this is not a discussion about climate change, honestly. It's about economic prosperity vis-a-vis climate change. I'll talk about why I'm saying this. Now, Pierre Poilievre wants to axe the carbon tax on consumers and industry emitters. So the carbon pricing that Mark Carney wants to keep on energy emitters and industry, he wants to repeal everything. And the reason is that he sees that, this carbon pricing that you put on industry, it will just be passed on to the consumer and it will just make things expensive for the consumer. He wants to revive pipeline projects such as Energy East Pipeline. He wants to repeal all the legislation against building more or getting more energy and making Canada the energy superpower of the world because we are very rich in resources. He wants to do that at any cost, and that comes at a cost of climate change and not looking at climate as a factor at all. And he has been criticized for that. And even though he has come up with some programs, but it's not enough. He's too aggressive on energy, and there needs to be a balance, is what the industry is saying. That's not me saying. It doesn't matter what I personally believe. I do feel that in today's economy, by the way, I do feel, I'll just say it, right? I do feel that we have to be seen as a superpower, because otherwise Trump will just steamroll us. But at the same time, I do feel that there has to be a balance. I don't see that balance in Pierre's plan right now. On the other hand, Mark Carney doesn't have balance either. He's just pro, green energy, which it's not a 5-year plan. It's like a 20-year plan. So it cannot happen today. We cannot be an clean energy superpower today. But we can be an energy superpower in the next 5 years because we have all the energy to do that. Anyways, he wants to eliminate the carbon tax, but wants to keep industrial carbon pricing because he feels that, it's important that industry is more responsible and they adopt to clean energy, use of clean energy. He wants to he wants to have incentive-based green programs, both for consumers as well as for industry. He wants to develop both clean energy and low carbon conventional energy sources and reform regulatory process to accelerate the approval and implementation of clean energy projects. So everything that Mark Carney is doing, because he's sitting on global boards of climate change, he's very much in line with what has been happening all this while. I just feel that this is a way more longer term plan. I'm not saying it's the wrong plan. I think we should move to clean energy. But both of these plans, depending on who you are, you would like one or the other. They're just, both of them are not very balanced in my view. Anyways, let's talk about foreign policy, where I think Mark Carney maybe has an edge. Let's talk about different parameters there. If you talk about foreign policy, both in context of US and the world, because we'll have to strengthen our ties with the world, with Trump being Trump right now. In terms of diplomatic experience, it's very clear that Pierre Poilievre does not have direct experience of dealing with crisis. And he does have, anti-World Economic Forum rhetoric to it. So, there are certain things that conservatives are just not good at. And Pierre Poilievre is no different. Whereas Mark Carney is a former G7 central banker. He frequently worked with US Treasury officials. He has been, handling global crisis, not just, Canada or US, North American crisis. And he has been trusted in Washington circles. So he's probably has more diplomatic experience and dealing with crisis. Relationship with Trump, I think ideologically, they are aligned on energy and anti-carbon tax. So they're very aligned in the way they are thinking. Not very right. I won't say Pierre Poilievre is extreme right like Trump is. But yeah, they're very aligned in the way they are thinking. But if you look at Mark Carney, he is more pragmatic. He is not aligned ideologically. It can't be, because it's a Republican versus a liberal that you're talking about. Carney is respected by both Democrats and Republicans as a level-headed economist. So the good thing is that, he's not a politician. And therefore, he can actually back his claims with numbers and facts, which Trump may not like. So I don't know how that dynamic will go, but it'll be interesting if he becomes prime minister. Big if there. Negotiation style, it's more aggressive. None is better than the other. But his is more aggressive, confrontational, appeals to Canadian sovereignty, fight for Canadian messaging, which is all amazing rhetoric to have. Mark Carney is a technocrat. He's measured. He prefers data-driven negotiation. I don't know if it worked with Trump or not, but that's who he is. He's not a politician. There's a US-Canada trade navigation that will be required in today's time. And it's unknown how Pierre Poilievre will actually, he wants to negotiate the NAFTA and the USMA, the US-Mexico-Canada free trade agreement. But it's, he doesn't have any direct experience of, managing that. Whereas Carney has dealt with crisis, like I said before, and he has negotiated or been part of these negotiations in the past. And not just that, it will be required for us to have free trade agreements with more stronger, ties with other players other than US. And I think Mark Carney has probably an edge over that given his global influence. But the question is, can we base our decision of who will be our prime minister based on just foreign policy? I personally feel that Pierre Poilievre's policies are made for the common Canadian. Aggressive tax cuts by reducing federal spending, a slightly better housing plan which is not just focused on the demand side, and the much talked about public safety, which has been of prime importance given the increased crime in Canada. Am I a little worried about the extreme right conservative sentiment of starting lines like the barbaric cultural tip line that came into play at the end of the Conservatives last time? A little bit. Mark Carney, on the other hand, is slightly doing well in areas like social services and climate change. And with him being an economist who has dealt with crisis before, he might be in a better position to negotiate trade agreements with US and the world. Mark Carney came at the last minute and he is sweeping the polls right now. At least, that's what the polls say. I don't know how true they are, but people were not talking about voting Liberal at all when Trudeau was in power or he was running for Prime Minister. And Mark Carney just came in at the last minute. Liberals lugged out on Trump, creating a global chaos. And now a lot of people actually think that, Mark Carney could, at the helm, could be a better person than Pierre Poilievre, just, navigating the overall trade agreements that Canada has to renegotiate with everyone, including the US. Now, what's crazy to me is no one was thinking of voting Liberal when Trudeau was in power. And now that Mark Carney has come and they have lugged out, Liberals have lugged out on Trump creating a global chaos, people think that Mark Carney and people, and rightfully so, he's an economist, right? They feel that he's better placed to negotiate our trade agreements with US and the world. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Liberals did mess up a lot in the last 10 years. And now the question is, can we afford to vote for Liberals and bring them back based on one reason, which is renegotiation of trade treaties or not? As for me, I already voted, and no, I'll not talk about who I voted for because this is a very personal decision. One thing that I'll say is everyone who can vote should vote on the 28th because if we do not vote, we lose the right to criticize. That's all I have for today. मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए bye bye.